guys! Welcome to Shone's Thoughts. Thank you for joining me and my beautiful plants today. Today, I'm going to jump right into a hook because I'm constantly being told by YouTube that they essentially look at every word I say on my script, so that I need to put up an amazing hook. So my hook today right away is going to be jumping directly to the topic that today we're going to talk about all the jobs that perhaps won't be required moving into New Earth. See, one of the things that I recognize is there's a lot of chaos out there, and a lot of people are essentially losing jobs. And I've talked about this before. We had a conversation before about Amazon in Canada, in Quebec. They had recently, or at least sometime last year, let go of considerable amount of people. And across North America, there's been different factory jobs closing, such as different plants that make cars and such. And well, definitely this is trauma when it comes to how the workers perceive it. There are a lot of positive outcomes that we're going to essentially discuss in a little bit. But before we get to that, I kind of wanted to go over, or perhaps talk about, the jobs that will no longer be required as we move forward. And the reason being is because when you take into consideration things like AI, which is essentially artificial intelligence, there is something that is beyond that as well, called synthetic intelligence. And overall, both of those two different aspects are intelligence, meaning that they are essentially tools, or tools is the right word, but it has such a bad connotation for me. But anyways, these are essentially different methods of perhaps moving forward without having to use a lot of manpower, or I would say wasted manpower. See, jumping right into it, because I was so excited as I sat down thinking about, well, I was going to watch my own video, and I suddenly started getting this idea into my head about, there are different jobs that won't be required. And funny enough, right off the top of my head, I've forgotten the one that I was going to talk about. But when you think about it, and I'll start like this, in the world of automation, we had differing jobs that were no longer required, and these were essentially factory jobs. Factory jobs, basically, at one point in time, we had human bodies standing at so many different positions within a factory, and many of these positions, at least how I understand it, were in harm's way, meaning that you had a lot of factories of the past, and essentially people got injured to the point that they would have a scoreboard up on the lunchroom or within the actual factory floor itself of how many days since they last had an accident. And they would essentially, of course, try to create that to be as long as possible. And so therefore there would be an effort to avoid having accidents, yet there was always the possibility of accidents. Even when you look out at many different types of jobs out there, like my own father lost a finger in a job, and I've known other people to lose a lot other things, as well as when you see and hear of all the news and the media, a lot of people have become injured. So there definitely would be, and there's going to be, a dramatic shift in how we essentially build our worlds, how we essentially manufacture or produce the goods that we have. And yet these don't necessarily have to come at the expense of manpower hours. And so one of the, I guess you could say, the possibly job that's already being affected are jobs like manufacturing and production. A lot of people are essentially losing their jobs because automation and AI is essentially taking over that aspect. And in a way, that's fantastic. I don't mean fantastic in the sense that people are losing their jobs, but fantastic that we're moving those human beings out of harm's way. No longer will we have to subject any man, woman, or child, because in a lot of times there was children being used, especially in the older times, but perhaps even around the world now, we'll no longer have to subject these people to being in harm's way just in order to earn money. And so when we transition, and as we transition, as jobs essentially disappear, other jobs will, of course, reemerge. And I'm saying reemerge because there's definitely going to be a great emergence of creative jobs coming online. Because, anyways, let's get into it. So, jobs that are going to disappear. Well, one of the jobs that are going to disappear is the overlapping political jobs. I'm not sure if you're aware, or perhaps you're maybe doing one of those jobs, but there seems to be an awful lot of jobs out in the world that are being done that are overlapping when it comes to political jobs. Even now, or perhaps in the past few years, they have been, and when I say they, I mean governments, looking at sizing down the governments, cutting away all of those excess jobs, those excess, perhaps, I don't want to use the word councils, but that type of idea, those jobs that seem to be redundant. And so those are definitely some of the jobs that we are going to lose, gratefully, of course, which will, of course, free up a lot of the requirement of tax money. Right there, I see another glowing possibility as well, is as we move towards more of a sovereign type of situation, should we be required to use money of some sort? It does definitely make sense that we all contribute towards funding our own local areas, yet there will be a definite decrease when it comes into federal types of situations. So rather than having people work far away, maybe we don't need those people to work like they do any longer. And that will definitely, once again, clear up our requirement to fund those jobs. See, what most people don't realize is that everyone out there who's doing something is making something, and that making something is a requirement of the consumer to pay. It's the person who's essentially buying services and products that eventually, has to essentially pay for it. So other jobs, such as I came to understand it, different styles of how homes are constructed. We are going to, rather than having people install certain products into the homes, we might switch those jobs out and have them take out some of the wiring that's in the house. See, one of the interesting parts is a long time ago, there was this guy named Tesla, and he, as per what you see in, you could say the history books, but we'll call them the alternative history books. Tesla had essentially shown that there was an ability to pull energy out of the air. And even in our modern technology, where we can take our iPhones and our tablets and we can drop them and they can be charged wirelessly now, that truly shows us that energy is considerably different. And we don't necessarily require any longer to have the homes perhaps wired the way they do. So this is, as I was demonstrated to, a great example of how we will be shifting jobs. So an electrician perhaps won't be playing the role of putting wiring in, rather taking wiring out of the buildings. So of course there will be a considerable shift to that as well. Other things like the vast amount of construction workers when it comes to building roads or fixing roads. See, one of the things that I've discovered is a lot of the pavement and sidewalks and different building materials that are used, they're used with inferior products in order for them to more consistently and more repetitiously fix and mend and pave. Because our world works on something called contracts, meaning that when something needs to be done, a contract is put out, and generally these contracts are picked up or sold off to the people that, have a connection to that organization, whether it's a friend, family, it's some sort of mafia-like system. When you look on the TV show Sopranos, was a great idea that, someone will take over a contract and then you might have a couple people working on site that really aren't working. And so we have different groups out there that essentially will pick up these contracts and then they'll do the work, of course. But the idea is, of course, to do that work more repeatedly. I don't know in your history of how often you've seen certain roads constantly being have to be fixed. And yet we sit back and we wonder, well, why? Why does it have to constantly be that? And when I look out in the world myself, I see so many private contractor road sign companies and construction companies. But if you imagine that we could live in a world where things would actually be fixed properly the first time, we wouldn't require the excess number of sign holders and construction, like not construction, but road repair crews. We could definitely reduce the amount if we were to essentially build a road properly the first time rather than build it or repair it, I mean, dig it back up, repair it again, dig it back up, repair it again, dig it back up. Like, have you seen this? And the awful lot of time and resources that are essentially utilized on this, and inferior products such as the asphalt and the material that's being used, perhaps there's better, more efficient ways that, should we save that money on funding essentially workers to work in other provinces and they say they're helping over here, and not have to pay the millions and millions of dollars to fund all of those salaries, that we could therefore divert that money into our local economies and train people essentially to build roads more efficiently and definitely at, you could say, more efficient anyways. So those are jobs that are definitely going to go by the wayside as well. And it doesn't necessarily mean all. It means that less people are going to be required to do the same job, because once you increase the efficiency of something and you do it properly, and when I mean properly, I'm meaning using the best technology, using the best methods, not having to worry about, is it financially reasonable? Like, there's always finances attached to everything, and a lot of times we fall back into the pool of the lesser of two evils. That we fall back into, oh well, we don't have the money to do it the best way, so we're going to do it the poor way, and we're going to keep doing it that way or the inferior way, and until we can't do it anymore. It's kind of like that idea of driving the car till the wheels fall off. Rather than, I believe, as we move into New Earth and we move into that mentality of community and local sustainability, that we will therefore spend more time focused on our own world around us. And if everyone does that, we will reduce the amount of time that's being wasted on the constant road construction projects, or not just the construction projects. I have no issues with that. It's the repair projects. Like, we have this one highway that's taken, I think they started in 2020, so it's, or 2021, but anyways, it's a project that was started like at least 3 or 4 years ago, and they have yet to finish it. But when I was driving by that project, I would drive by and I would see workers standing around. I would see the actual machines standing around doing nothing. And yes, there's always complications when they do a job, but I went by there a lot of times and I was seeing a lot of different big machinery sitting there doing nothing, and sometimes in the exact place that once was, or a similar place anyways, leading me to the idea that a lot of these projects were essentially leaving big machinery, which from my understanding is either rented or leased, but on site, and that all costs money. And yet if we could do a project right the first time, one time, with all the resources at our disposal, then we could definitely save considerable man hours and therefore release a lot of the jobs. Now, releasing the jobs doesn't mean a negative thing. It simply frees up that manpower to therefore go do something else. Divert those funds that would have been spent repeatedly fixing a road, for example, to going and perhaps one time fixing playgrounds without all of that foam crap that they put underneath the children's playgrounds nowadays. We could essentially bring back the beautiful playgrounds all over the place and restore parks. I was in Golden Ears Provincial Park the other day, and I was walking along a very nice path, but I noticed that there's a lot of missing park benches, decaying pathways, broken sidewalks, and there's essentially a lot of decay when it comes to those provincial parks. And if we could essentially repair a road better the first time, we could then divert those people over perhaps to fix our parks that are not used as much or that are not within the city limits. Other jobs that could be or would be and will be replaced are even a lot of these humanitarian jobs, meaning that if we're living in a world where more people are essentially producing or contributing is the better word, then the less that we have to be concerned with when it comes to the humanitarian jobs. And even with the idea of medical systems, if we are, for example, all eating better and we're rid of all of the poisonous toxins that is essentially dropped into our food, which are even sometimes labeled as natural flavor, and you'll find natural flavor in an awful lot of foods that even claim to be organic. If we're eating a lot healthier, we're going to definitely see a reduction in the need for medical, even for doctors, for nurses, for all these healthcare workers. See, healthcare working is a giant mega industry where a lot of people are employed, but they're employed under the premise that people are getting sick and that they need to get sick, when in reality, no one truly needs to get sick. And once these illnesses that are essentially propagated and influenced by big pharma and, just even the big food corporations. Actually, on the topic of that, I'm going to link a video right here to this amazing website, or not website, to this amazing YouTube channel that I found. And it has to do with Canadian food, and it has a couple different videos on Canadian milk and Canadian butter. I think there is one. There's also brands that put coffee or have there's brands that have plastic in the coffee. There's a video on that, but it's a great channel that's disclosing and essentially exposing a lot of the toxins and stuff that is in our food. And so when we actually eradicate, and I'm going to use the word eradicate, these toxins and different chemicals that are put in our food and our water, that's going to open up a considerable amount of energy once again, or Ethereum perhaps, or however it is that we look at it, but manpower hours. I like that word. It's going to open up a lot of manpower hours so that we can therefore revert that energy towards there. We can even go into things such as the postal service or how we ship things. In Canada, shipping things is very expensive. And I don't know if that's just, because of me, but nonetheless, I've talked to a lot of people, and the amount of cost that it costs to ship things is expensive. Of course, I don't really know how we're going to change that. However, when it comes to the overall shipping industry, see, the way that our world was switched or swerved into was to manufacture things in foreign countries and then have those items shipped over on the boats, unloaded in the ports, and then essentially trucked all over the country. And a lot of times things would be manufactured in one place and then shipped to another place, and then that place would manufacture things and then ship to another place. And one of those examples that I was given was cranberries. Something to do with cranberries in America would be shipped up to Canada for our Thanksgiving, and then we would ship our cranberries down there for their Thanksgiving. And yet that doesn't necessarily, seem proper. Apples as well. Apples is something that most places can make apples, that we don't necessarily have to have one country growing or one province growing apples, that more people could create, as I've mentioned in previous audios, that we could create a lot more fruits in our own backyards, across our own streets, around our own communities, and therefore we wouldn't have to mass produce apples. I heard from, I think his name's Gundry, that apples are actually on the store shelves kept like from harvest time to when you get them. It actually is quite old, that you're not necessarily eating a brand new apple, that apple might have been a few months old. Actually, on the ad or the little blurb that I was watching on YouTube, the Gundry guy said that some of the apples are actually a year old. And so as we reduce the amount of shipping goods from one country to another, a lot of those jobs are going to go by the wayside as well. So we're looking at jobs in the manufacturing, of course, but in the shipping. And that shipping includes the giant ships that go across the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean, carrying stuff and leaking out oil and, just being hazardous potentially overall. And then in the ports themselves, the overabundance of, even just dock workers and cargo workers and all of that stuff. And why this is important to highlight is because when we look at it from a perspective of I'm the worker and I'm losing my job, it seems traumatic. And yet it actually is a blessing in disguise, because it frees up that person. And yes, when we look that we're stuck into an economy that is requiring us to pay all of these subscription fees and rentals and mortgages and all this stuff, and that it all has to be done on a monthly basis, yes, then therefore it looks like a traumatic, dramatic experience. And yet what it's doing is it's opening us up to more potential to sit back and relax. And so with, for instance, having jobs that are being lost, we're also going to be having jobs that are going to be created. We're going to have a massive amount of healers coming out, and not healers in as doctors, but healers just as in beings who are rippling their energy, and other people therefore can see that. Nonetheless, back to the jobs that are going to go away, is we're going to have a lot of those essentially shipping jobs that go by the wayside. One of them would be truck drivers, long haul truck drivers, because if we don't have to waste our time making something in one place, shipping it to another, if we can therefore divert that truck driver's energy to something sort of local. Also, we can imagine in places like, for instance, my city, we have this thing called the West Coast Express, and it's essentially a public train that moves quite slow from Mission all the way into Vancouver. Essentially what it does is every day it takes workers in, and these workers, they're unable to live in Vancouver because of the price is so expensive. And so they live in the suburbs in this very slow train, and I've been on it several times, and it's very slow. It's not as fast as the GO train in Toronto, and it definitely isn't anywhere near the Shinkansen or the rapid trains, the maglev trains in China, or the Shinkansen in Japan. But see, as we can divert those resources and those manpower hours, we can perhaps start to build these faster commuter trains. And so therefore we can get to place A to place B considerably faster, if we even need to do that. And so, yeah, what are other jobs that are going to go away? So we have manufacturer workers, and this doesn't mean to go away completely. But let's talk about manufacturing for a second. In the beginning of this podcast, this particular episode, I talked about how we're going to essentially lose a lot of jobs that were in harm's way. See, we have different technologies and these have been going around for a long time, where we can 3D print a considerable amount of things that are required. And so these different factory workers that are having to work in these situations where there's sharp knives and sharp edges, and there's definitely potential for damage of the human body, we already have replaced a lot of this, so that we're moving those people out of harm's way. And I think I'm getting a little bit repetitive of that. And yet there's different parts when it comes to manufacturing. There's a new TV series called Star Trek Starfleet Academy. And in there, they show something that I've seen for a long time. It's machine drones that are able to put together apartment buildings and construction projects that you can manufacture the pieces that then you can have a drone fly up and put it into place. And this may seem futuristic, and definitely they're trying to predictively program that when, Star Trek is the future. And yet that type of technology is already here. The amount of drone usages in, well, war is where they use it mostly, but even during the policing situation during the lockdowns, they use drones to do a lot of different things. And if you're into video games, you can definitely have seen the usage of drones in different games like Ghost Recon and Call of Duty, where drones were being utilized to a higher degree, not only just to do what we think drones do, but they can also pick up and move things. They can do so much more than we are aware. And actually, in this video that I saw recently, they were showing this, I'll call it a drone essentially, because it looked like a human body figure with arms and legs and such, but it was still a computer program built inside of it. And this robotic drone had the ability to do martial arts almost like Bruce Lee. Like, it was crazy of how fast it was punching and kicking. Maybe, of course, not as fast as a Homo sapien, but yet it had the ability to do a lot more. And so, you know, the idea of us not having a world with the same amount of jobs, because we're taking a lot of that redundancy away, not just out of the political system and out of the manufacturing and the health system, but even out of other systems, such as education. You could remove perhaps some of the, what do they call those people? But anyway, the people at the, I can't think of it. Anyways, the superintendents and stuff like that. Perhaps we can bring down the amount of people that are spending doing all of that paperwork in some sort of office away from the actual schools themselves, that we can bring back those people into the school buildings and have the schools more, as I've mentioned before, turned into exploratoriums where we don't necessarily need the bureaucracy and the red tape when it comes to how our school and how our education is taught. And not only that, our ability to utilize artificial intelligence could be something beneficial to us, as long as we're choosing to use it in a, we'll call it a righteous way, but more of a mindful way. Utilize it as opposed to use it. I know those two words seem very similar, but to me, utilize means to incorporate in your box of tools, as opposed to use it. And use it as meaning that have it write your homework or have it do your homework. So utilize it to empower you to make life easier and not necessarily give away all these tasks, meaning your homework or designing your projects and such, or writing your entire script and essentially putting together your entire video for, and then plopping on YouTube and then having to, anyways, that's just me going on a rant. As I've mentioned previous times before, there's a lot of competition on YouTube for people's attention because there's a lot of different AIs out there that some Homo sapiens are utilizing, yet there's also AIs utilizing AIs to create complete channels that are based on just a single sentence. And, anyways, so when we move into our new Earth, we're going to have a considerable amount of time. And so I ask you, what jobs do you think are going to go by the wayside? Because even with what I've shared with you now, there is still so much change. And that's one of the challenges that we have when it comes to job replacement, displacement, however we'd like to look at it, that we have been programmed essentially to fear change, to resist change. But there's a saying of what you resist persists, meaning what you focus on not wanting generally comes in. And that's because we are powerful creators. They essentially programmed us to forget that. They altered our DNA, which is nothing like what we see in a grade 9 or a high school chemistry book Our DNA is so much different than we could have ever imagined. But we have been programmed, whether we blame that on Enki or Enlil, or we blame that on Bill Gates or modern scientists or whatever. The point being is that we have been limited. We have been put beneath a glass ceiling, and the glass ceiling has been stepped on pretty heavy. And yet we've been put on the boob tube that we can all get past that, when in reality, you pay to play. It became very apparent with video games, especially the free to play video games, that you definitely pay to play and you pay to win. And yet I see moving into New Earth that there being a considerable amount of increased in amount of opportunities and options. See, here's another example of a job. Like I'm seeing a Amazon truck go by. In a world where we're in alignment with what is best for us, perhaps for those packages that we do have shipped, when we do want something, we can have a drone fly it to us. We can have a schedule where the drone will come and drop it off on our balcony or our front porch, and we wouldn't have to have people driving around adding more pollution to the traffic on the streets. And of course, if we reduce all of those trucks that I was talking about, those long haul trucks moving product from A to B, and we opened up smaller, more localized, community supported factories that were perhaps self automated in a way that, we're allowing for more creativity maybe, but self-automated, we could therefore reduce the amount of trucks that are driving on the road. So when you take that family vacation on the road, should that be what you choose, the highways would be considerably less packed. And therefore, we would have to spend less time driving ourselves, meaning that we wouldn't be stuck in traffic jams where you have 100 cars waiting across to get across a road because you have this rig that, or these rigs, keeping in mind when a rig goes from stop to acceleration, it is slow. It requires a lot more diesel. We're waiting. There's so many different small fractions of, once you take those rigs off the road, traffic moves faster, the consumption of gas in the cars goes less, your amount of time to drive in the car is reduced considerably, and then you're spending more time with your family. And if we're not having to go to far off places, for example, to do our jobs on slow trains such as the West Coast Express, perhaps it was designed that way, then we're also not wasting time. See, one of the greatest things that ever happened to me is when I stopped working for the Brick in Langley. I talked about this in a previous podcast. This place was actually a bridge away. I had to cross a toll bridge at that point. And when there was traffic, it took me considerably longer amount of time in order to get home. And so while I utilized that time to listen to people like Tony Robbins and Steve Scott and John Gray, I listened to quite a bit as well. I utilized that time. Not everyone has that desire or that ability. Often people who have worked in factories and are extremely tired and fatigued in their mind, they're not necessarily wanting to listen to self-mastery and self-improvement audios. And yet, there is so much possible potential energy or potential attention, I'll call it, if we could therefore once again redirect that. And see, what we have to understand, and maybe have to is a pretty strong word, but what we ought to understand is a lot of this was purposeful system construction in order to get us to waste a lot of our time and energy and mental capacity. Partly because we've been slowly waking up, especially a lot more since 2012. 2012 was the end of the Mayan calendar where they prophesized the end of the world. And, the predictive programming in the movie, in the movies, they actually created a movie called 2012 to get us to perhaps create that situation. But since that time, and even before that time, before the collapse of the economy of America in 2008, when they had the housing crisis, we've been essentially waking up. More and more people every day are realizing that perhaps there's a better way to live our lives than the way that we have been exposed to or suppressed to. And so as these vast amount of jobs fall to the wayside, there's going to be so many more opportunities because we're going to have that free time and that energy, not only to invest it more with our family. And right there becomes a huge benefit. If you don't have all of those wasteful, repetitious, long hauling, wasteful jobs, because free energy really does exist in some form or fashion, then we don't need to have all of these people doing all of this stuff, and they can be at home with their families and essentially investing their time within their own communities. And therefore, we will become more sovereign and therefore essentially have to put out less when it comes to taxes. And right now is tax season, and a lot of people are, from what I see on YouTube, struggling to pay taxes, struggling to pay mortgages, struggling to pay car payments, struggling to pay a lot. And that's because we were in a system that required us to pay and play. But once we stopped paying, they stopped allowing us to play. And so we're now where we are because of essentially the choices we made. And while our choices were essentially limited, we now are going to have that opportunity to perhaps take that time and revision and re-see and remember, because our world in the past, a very, very, very long time ago, I mean, very long time ago. I mean, they tell us in the history books that our history is like 5 to 10,000 years old. I call BS on that. Our history is over 250,000 years. And I don't mean caveman history. I mean history where civilizations were far more advanced than what we believe we have now. And so I'm going to leave you with that. When more jobs seem to fall by the wayside, perhaps think about what job will replace that, and then go out and do that. Or if not, spend more time with your family, spend more time with your friends, loved ones, spend more time in nature for sure. Those trees, they really do need our help. They don't really need our help, I guess. We could really use their help. It's actually like kind of like that movie, the Hobbit movie, where those two hobbits, they went and asked the trees for help, and the trees are what actually made the difference. And if we essentially insert nature with those trees, maybe that's a much better way of looking at it. The more that we are able to do for nature, the more that nature does for us, because it's a symbiotic relationship. So thank you so much for sharing your time and attention with me. I look forward to speaking to you a lot more. Yes, it's a celery plant. Thank you for pointing that out, Vernon. This actually is a store-bought celery plant. So in my previous videos, I had a video of me creating celery juice, and I would always take the inside part of the plant and I would put it in water, and I had a whole method for being able to regrow it. So the celery plant that we're looking at is an actual, like, it's a celery store-bought plant, but then I essentially gave it new life and replanted it. And this is what a celery plant looks like in normal life. Like, they don't look like the way they see in the grocery store when all the stocks are just going up. That's a way in order to keep the celery plant, I guess, farmed more efficiently for mass production. And in behind it are potato plants, I believe. Yeah, so the celery plant, it was a method that I used to, after I took the celery stalks off from the plant, I would therefore leave it in water, in a whole bunch of water for a very long time outside, not immersed, but the actual base of the thing in water. And then as it started to turn green, because you'll find them to be a little yellowish, as they started to turn green, then I took it and I put it into plant pots. They seem to prefer plant pots that don't move. So that's one of my experiences, and differing plant pots provide differing results, you could say. They honestly seem to like it more in ceramic pots as opposed to plastic, or I have, and I'll show you right here. So those ones didn't do as well as this one, and they seem to definitely like it better in ceramic. And then I have this as well right here, and they're doing really well. So although I do think that you guys are gone, the ones who asked about that or commented about that, I will leave it right there. Thank you so much for sharing your time and attention with me. I look forward to having a lot more talks because this world is changing regardless of who wants to resist. We're moving forward. Black magic is going away, and we are moving into a world where source, love, and God are all around us once again. It's already here in nature, and we're about to bring it on. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you very soon.